what stands between you and lunch. So I'm going to be talking about the Wisconsin Coastal Guide. So I have a little question that I want to ask you. How many people have heard of the Great Lakes Circle Tour before? Raise your hands. So a few people. How many people have actually taken a Great Lakes Circle Tour trip around one of the lakes? So a few people. Well, so this presentation will hopefully be for you, and maybe it'll encourage the rest of you to consider a Great Lakes Circle Tour trip. So I've got a few different ways to kind of get into this, but this is a new way. I'm an urban planner partly by training, and I have to take some continuing education to keep my certification. And I was listening to an American Planning Association podcast and came across this one. It was about a book called In Motion, The Experience of Travel, and it was a conversation between Bob Yarrow, who was the head of the Regional Planning Association of New York, and Tony Hiss, who's the author of this book. And they're talking about this concept of deep travel. And it's defined as this exhilarating state of mind that travel can evoke when suddenly everything seems fresh, vivid, intensely interesting, and memorable. And so I imagine that some of you, when you're traveling, come across this kind of experience, or maybe even walking down the street on occasion when everything's different and you're paying more attention. And what they've really done in this particular podcast, it's an interesting discussion, is looking at how urban planners, and I inserted that maybe GIS specialists can take on the role of stewards of this kind of travel by helping to shape the communities that you live in. And any community can be this one that can evoke this type of experience. I've got one particular experience I have when I moved from Michigan to New Orleans after I finished my degree. I drove down to Cincinnati and met with some people on the city planning staff there. They told me, oh, if you've got some time, you've got to go take the Natchez Trace down. And if you go to Jackson, Mississippi, stop at this restaurant called the White House. And so I was driving down the Trace, and I came into Jackson, and it was a Sunday, right after church was getting out. I came to this restaurant, and all the people who were there. It was full. I sat down at a table with a bunch of other people I'd never met before. It was a table with fried chicken and biscuits, and the inside of the table spun around, and just everything. I just remember everything about that particular day. And so I guess I was engaged in this concept of deep travel at that particular time. So this is kind of deep travel related to the wonderful Great Lakes that we have that represent 20% of the planet's fresh surface water. So kind of going back to what spawned the idea of developing this Wisconsin Coastal Guide, back in the summer of 1996, I was listening to the radio, and I heard a story about a father and son taking a round-the-world trip on a sailboat. It just got me really excited. It was kind of like, I need to do something like that with my dad. I think a round-the-world sailing trip's kind of out of the question, but I started to come up with ideas. And we thought of a circle tour trip. We took a couple weeks to do this. My dad was a geologist, worked for the State Highway Department. His first project out of school was working on the Mackinac Bridge. And so he was able in this particular trip to share a lot of his experience about geology, and it was a wonderful time. We stopped in a community on Lake Huron called Geographic, and we stumbled across the Celtic Festival and had some great beer, and we went up to Rossport up on the far northern part of Lake Superior, had a nice meal, and then went into our cabin. And about 2 hours later, as we were falling asleep, all of a sudden everything starts shaking, and these lights start shining through. And I thought it was like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. It turned out that we were about 12 feet away from the main Canadian Pacific rail line, and for every half hour after that, something was trailing by. So that was deep travel too, I guess. So it was a wonderful experience that I was really glad that I had that chance to do that with him before he passed away. Then I had that thought in the back of my mind, and I came across this news article in 2004. It was a Cleveland Plain dealer talking about rethinking the Circle Tour and trying to get people off the relatively busy highways that represent the Circle Tour and actually experiencing the lake, experience the attractions along the lake. And I think their little statement here, motorists have no trouble finding the Circle Tour route, but sometimes they have trouble finding Lake Erie. And so they really thought this, and I thought, maybe a kind of interactive web mapping site to kind of find those places to get off the lake would be a fun thing to do. So I have a lot of different inspiration. I started searching for sites and trying to build the case to be able to create this type of a site. one of them I'm sure you have, being map-interested people, you probably have a subscription to National Geographic, and every once in a while you get an issue and you shake it and some map drops out. And you've probably seen these where you open them up and they've got these little one-sentence stories about some compelling place to visit. So that was one of the types of inspirations for the Coastal Guide. And then one other one is this site that you might find interesting, and I consider it a map site for the serious map geek. It's called Degree Confluence, or it's confluence.org. And so it takes these kind of random places around the globe where a degree of latitude and a degree of longitude cross, and it lets you go and discover them and tell the story. And so in Wisconsin, we have a rather unique one, kind of one of those primary ones, where we're halfway between the equator and the North Pole, 45 degrees latitude, and we're a quarter way around from that line in Greenwich that goes to the observatory, 90 degrees longitude. And that's in a cornfield in Marathon County. And so maybe some of you have been here already. They've got a sign put up called a geological marker, which I think really should be a geographical marker. But anyways, a lot of people have discovered this and have told their stories. And there used to be this tavern nearby, Gaseki's, where you could go and get a shirt and get a little pin. I think they've moved some of that stuff over to Wausau, where you can still, after you find this place, you can go get some commemoration. Lou and Peter Berryman sang a song about it. It's just, it's really kind of cool. And it's my son down there. You probably hate this picture of him kind of looking like a little junior map geek holding his GPS, and we discovered this. And so I think, if you can make a cornfield special, right, that's a pretty cool thing. So with those kind of ideas, and with support from the Coastal Management Program, we worked on developing this site starting in 2005, at least version 1. And we used the Google Maps API, so in the guide it talks about this being an open source. I don't know if that's really open source, but there is some open source technology kind of helping with this here. But if you're interested in this, there's probably a dozen or so different map layers, attractions along the coast that you can click on and explore. A lot of it leads to other content. So here's some of the map features that are out there. First of all, there was a challenge in just documenting the Circle Tour route. All there were was cartoon maps out there, and so I kind of created a detailed kind of local roads version of the Great Lakes Circle Tour route, at least around Lake Superior and Lake Michigan. I included rustic roads and some bike routes, and then on parks. There's all kinds of different parks, right, from township parks up to the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, state natural areas, and so on. And then along the shore, some of the really compelling features are beaches and lighthouses, and then water shipwrecks. And so some of the content that we really clicked through to try to leverage, like about lighthouses, for example. People are fascinated with Great Lakes lighthouses, and there's a number of people who have done really detailed stories about the lighthouses, and we've connected to that, so you can explore and get deep if you like to. So just one example here is this kind of collection of parks. You click on a particular feature, pops up a little dialog box, and then you can jump to, if there is a website for the park, you can click on it. Milwaukee County has got some wonderful sites for each park, and they've got some really detailed maps, so you can see all the different areas in the park and some of the activities that you can do there. We've kind of started moving to the Google Spreadsheet Mapper. It's kind of a process to put information into a Google spreadsheet and then create a KML out of that. It's really formatted well for our purposes. It creates nice design balloons that pop up. I think I'm going to, I want to show you panorama photos. This is the real fun part of the project for me, because it got me a chance to drive on every road to every public access point on the lake and set up a little tripod and take a panorama photo. And so I will kind of jump out here, and we'll cross our fingers that we can get things to work here. My short little demo part of the slide that I didn't plan. It's wisconsincoastalguide.org. Cross our fingers that the site's up and working. Expand it here. Scroll down a little bit, and we'll go explore a panorama photo. One of the things I've got to do is upgrade the version of the Google Maps API so that I can scroll a little bit easier. So this uses a little Java applet that was used. I first came across it for real estate. So if you were touring a house, you could look 360-degree panorama at the house and then have it show the area on the floor plan that you were looking at. And so, so you kind of see what this looks like, and then we've got some controls here where I can click and drag around here. So there are some 340 of these that I've taken. Some of these photos date back to 2006 to 2010 time period, so it's time to go out and visit the coast again and do another round of these, I think. Yeah. So, and then the other kind of cool thing about here down at the bottom is you can kind of zoom in and you can see that the little cone of view is changing and narrowing down. So that's kind of the fun, the fun part of the coastal guide. So we'll jump back into the presentation here. So Duckware PMVR is that software if you want to use it. And we paid a little nominal fee for them. I think because we're an educational institution, they gave us a little bit of a break. So I think they have a new HTML5 version, which kind of solves a lot of issues with use in mobile devices and use on Macs and whatnot. And so I think we paid them a couple $100 for the ability to be able to do all these photos. And then just a couple other examples here. We talked with UW Extension, who does Portal, Wisconsin, this kind of calendar of cultural events in the state, and they created a GeoRSS feed for us, and we're able to kind of filter just the coastal areas and include current events, current cultural art events that are going on. So that's kind of a neat little application too. Relatively recently, we worked with our web development staff and created a mobile version of the site that kind of is aware of your location. So that's a little more some open source technology, jQuery mobile and HTML5 to be able to create that. So that's been out for the last maybe year to two or so for the site. It kind of recognizes if you're using a mobile device and it kind of jumps you over to that little site. And then kind of hitting the home stretch here, we're kind of ramping up and would like to do a version 3 of the coastal guide and include some new features. And so one aspect would be some new map features to include in that list of attractions down. So one of them would be water trails, or kind of the information that DNR and partners have been collecting about sea kayaking and access points and attractions there. Hiking trails, we want to kind of make this site useful for birders. And a couple of fun things, I think, would be, I'm really interested now in going out and traveling and finding kind of that good, cool, local food. And there's some websites, when I go on a trip, I'll sometimes check out this roadfood.com site and find those little diners and those little funky places to go eat. And I know there's a lot of those in Wisconsin that we can include in this. And then I'm really intrigued by sounds, and there's a whole field of soundscape ecology out there and capturing some of the sounds that are unique to the Great Lakes. One of the other things that we really want to do is work closely with the Department of Tourism and the Wisconsin Harbor Towns Association to promote the site a little bit more. So that's another angle that we're looking at here. One of the things that I always thought that the panoramas were a representation of public access, but I think I want to kind of move away and actually document, more formal public access and identify the kinds of activities that you can take there. And I'm sure you've seen kind of state park kind of guides that you can do horseshoeing here, or you can go bike riding or fishing or whatnot here. This is an example here that I'm showing where they did a really good job of that. It's called the Connecticut Coastal Access Guide, and they really kind of capture that type of information by facilities, activities, and environmental settings. So that's kind of gold standard, I think, for collecting this kind of information. And then I'd like to, instead of just having our mobile site say you're here, I'd like to incorporate some functionality that says here's what's nearby that you might want to go visit. And so that's kind of thinking through that process. One good site that does that, if you've got an iPhone or maybe any mobile device, is called Google Field Trip. I don't know if you've used it before, fieldtripper.com. And I work on campus kind of right near Lake Mendota, and there's all sorts of different features nearby, and it buzzes you and points them out to you as you move along. So that's kind of some of the functionality I'd like to improve in the coastal guide. And then one other angle I think would be not just going and seeing some of these places, but doing some activities, some place-based learning. And so there's, one example would be, there's a lot of geocaches out there, but there's a lot of geocaches that have an educational angle, and there's even some that have a marine, Great Lakes-oriented educational level. I know the historical societies work together, with CBAN and some other groups to create some kind of maritime history geocaches. And we've done some work up in the Duluth Superior area with some that kind of look at environmental issues in the St. Louis River estuary. Another concept, we've got a great project on campus called ARIS, Augmented Reality Interactive Storytelling. It's kind of like environmental detective games, role-playing games on your phone. We've created a couple up again in the St. Louis River estuary, where one of them, you take on the role of a chef's assistant and you have to make a meal with ingredients you would find in the estuary. You meet all these characters, you kind of get tricked, it's fun, and in the process you learn about all the issues that are kind of central to the estuary, like fisheries issues, invasive species, wild rice and how it's disappeared, and things like that. And then the last one was a fun thing that I've done. I stumbled across this site called Google Lit Trips, and what it is Google Earth applications centered around the journeys in literature. And so what I've done there is I've done 2 Google Lit Trips, one with each of my kids. The first one was this children's book. It's about 60 years old, called Paddle to the Sea, and it's 27 chapters throughout all the Great Lakes, and it's every bit as relevant now as it was when it was written back in the 1940s. And so my son and I did this, and we got a lot of mileage out of that. And then we did another one I did with my daughter, because I try and be fair here, and we read Ernest Hemingway's Big Two-Hearted River. It's essays about trout fishing and kind of restoration after coming back from World War I, and it's set up in the eastern Upper Peninsula. And so we had a family vacation kind of retracing Hemingway's steps. So that, and we tried to, what I did was try to work in the science of trout fishing, water quality, water management, entomology, bugs, what trout eat, and that was a lot of fun too. So trying to work those things in. And I think with that, hopefully I didn't go over time, and if we've got time, I'd try to answer some questions.